I want to start this video by talking about a topic I glanced on in the last video. Why did we come to Earth? How could we be crazy enough to come to Earth? And there are two aspects of it I want to talk about. There's an alpha aspect and an omega aspect. And the alpha aspect is that those of us who chose to come to Earth, we had sort of graduated from natural planets. We had most of the experiences that you can have on a natural planet. But then we decided that we wanted to have also the kind of experiences that you can only have on an unnatural planet. In other words, there isn't the kind of selfishness and self-centeredness on a natural planet that you see on an unnatural planet. And we decided in order to get a broader range of experiences, we wanted to experience the environment of an unnatural planet because it would give us a higher level of awareness after we ascend. So you can ascend from a natural planet, but you don't have as broad of a range of experiences as if you have been on an unnatural planet. So that was the alpha reason. And it really isn't crazy when you think about it, even though it can, when we look at it from down here, it can feel crazy. I remember when I first learned about avatars, as I said in my last video, I thought, how could I be stupid enough to make the choice to come to Earth? And it took me some time to realize that it wasn't such a stupid choice after all, because it gave me some opportunities that I didn't have. Of course, the effect of the birth trauma that I talked about is that we can't see any opportunities on Earth because we think this is the worst possible environment you could ever be in, and we don't want to be here. But here comes then the omega aspect of why we decided to come to Earth. Because you can say, who was it that decided to come to Earth? And I have talked about, the core of our being is the conscious you. And basically the conscious you is pure awareness, which sounds abstract. I'll return to that in just a minute. But in reality, it wasn't the conscious you who decided to come to Earth. When we're in embodiment, the conscious you is making decisions. And it's making decisions based on our current state of consciousness. What does that mean? What is our current state of consciousness? Well, it means how many of these subconscious selves, these filters, do we have? As I said, in order to descend into embodiment, we have to take on a lot of illusions. But then we have also taken on some of these selves that was a result of the fallen beings hunting us and exposing us to these traumas. So whatever cells we have, they form the filter that we are looking at the world through. And the conscious you has to make decisions based on seeing through that filter. So this is the conscious you making decisions. But the conscious you didn't make a decision to come to Earth. Our higher selves did, our I am presences. So the I am presence is a being that resides in the spiritual realm. It isn't yet an ascended master, but it wants to ascend, and it decides, in order to have a higher level of ascension, I want to experience an unnatural planet. And then it creates out of itself the conscious you and sends the conscious you into embodiment on Earth. And so you can say, and I met people who have had this reaction, that they felt forced to come here. You could in a way say that. The conscious you didn't make the choice, the I am presence made the choice. But the thing is, the conscious you is the I am presence is the conscious you. It's just that while the conscious you is seeing through all these filters, you can't see yourself that way. You can't experience that you really are out of the I am presence and one with the I am presence. But this is something that comes as you walk the spiritual path, and first you have a connection to the I am presence, then you gain more and more oneness, and you make peace with the fact that we're not two separate beings here. So, but now again, why did the I am presence decide to send the conscious you to a crazy planet like Earth? Because the I am presence knows what I said. The conscious you is pure awareness. And what does it mean that the conscious you is pure awareness? It means the conscious you can create any kind of subconscious self, any kind of personality basically, that you can do on Earth. You look at all people on Earth. They have a certain outer personality. But this is not the conscious you. This is just something that the conscious you created often in reaction to Earth. But here's the really important point of this. And this is something that is, as far as I can tell, unique to these spiritual teachings about the avatars. You won't really find it in any other spiritual teaching, maybe some I'm not aware of, but all the spiritual teachings I've studied, they didn't have it. So the essence of the whole thing here is the conscious you can create all of these subconscious selves, but it does not become the subconscious selves. It only takes them on. So you can compare it that the conscious you is a naked body, and when it takes on a subconscious self, it's like putting on a piece of clothing. And some people have put on so many layers of clothing that they have come to identify themselves with the clothing. They have forgotten their conscious selves, they have forgotten their spiritual teachings. They identify themselves totally with all these layers of clothing they have on. But what you have put on, you can take off. So, the conscious you has not become the subconscious selves, it is still pure awareness. This means that at any point in time, whatever your situation is, no matter how many of these subconscious selves you have put on, how many layers of clothing, you can become aware of this and you can start taking off the clothing, taking off the subconscious selves. And I've given this in exercise in some of my other videos, so I'll just briefly refer to it here. You can right now, you can close your eyes, mentally become aware. You are sitting here watching this video. You can mentally step outside of the room, look at your body from the outside, watching this video. You can step outside of the building, even outside of the earth, until you are mentally out in space, looking down on your body, watching this video. And this is the conscious you that becomes aware that it isn't identified with the outer situation it's in. And that is why it wasn't so crazy of your I Am Presence to send the conscious you into embodiment, because the I Am Presence knows the conscious you will always be pure awareness. But now listen to this. What is the purpose then of taking on all of these selves and coming to identify yourself as this outer person? Well, there's two purposes to it. First of all, you grow from it, because you grow by going into a situation, immersing yourself in it, and then awakening from it. So you basically, first you say, oh, I am this kind of a person. And then you awaken, no, I am not this kind of person. I am a spiritual being up there in the higher realm. And it is this interchange of the identification, disidentification, the immersion, and awakening, that's what gives us extra spiritual growth. In fact, that's what gives us spiritual growth, because even on a natural planet, we do much the same. It's just easier on a natural planet to escape the identification with it. So this is one aspect. But the other aspect is, of course, that this is how we demonstrate to the people on Earth that they can do the same. They can also become aware that they are a conscious you, because beings who were created to embody on Earth, they also have a conscious you and an I Am Presence. And it's the same process for them. So ask yourself this question. If we came as avatars, a large group of avatars, to have a positive impact to help the people on Earth, right? How do we best help people? Do we help people by coming here as these superior beings, these godlike beings who can say, you should do this or you should not do that, you should follow me, you should listen to what I say? No. I said in my previous video, we felt rejected by people on Earth when we talked to them. And it's because talking to people has a limited possibility. They have to be open to it to even hear what we're saying, and many people are not open to it. So what is the better way to teach, actually? It is we come into embodiment, we take on all of this outer personality, we identify ourselves just the way other people identify themselves, and then we awaken from it and demonstrate that we can awaken. In other words, instead of being these superior beings who descended from above telling people what they should do, we descend, become just like human beings, then we awaken and show I have awakened from the state of mind you are in, and therefore you can awaken too. So you see, once you begin to turn this over in your mind, use your intuition about it, you see that, oh, it wasn't really so crazy of us to take embodiment. It wasn't that stupid. I felt really stupid for some time, but then I started realizing maybe I wasn't quite as stupid as I thought I was. Yeah, quite a few people I met who would disagree with that. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. What matters is how does my conscious you identify itself? And so for you, of course, what matters is how does your conscious you identify itself? It may be slightly different than mine. You may not feel stupid for coming here. You may have other feelings, other sensations about Earth and coming to Earth. Now, so here's what I wanted to talk about really. The main topic of this video is how do we start getting out of these selves? How do we start getting away from this primal self that I talked about? That's like the first shock, the first trauma. We created this self to suppress it. And of course, we have created a number of selves since then in relation to how we see ourselves on Earth, how we see ourselves in relation to human beings in general, but also fallen beings in particular. And this was something, quite frankly, even after I got these teachings about the avatars, it took me some years to really turn this over in my mind. And I'm saying this because you might also have to have a little patience with yourself. And what I usually do when I come across a spiritual teaching, I can intuitively sense it has something for me because it stirs something in my mind. There's a reaction in my mind. And I've learned over the years that whenever I have a reaction in my mind, there's something here I haven't resolved, because otherwise I wouldn't have a reaction. So what I usually do is I study the teaching, I focus on it, and then I sort of put it on the shelf. I put it aside. I don't go into it intellectually and analyze it and want to understand it all at once. I just sort of put it aside. And usually what happens is sometime later, suddenly I have this, now I see it. What I couldn't see before. And sometimes it takes days, sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months, and in a few cases it's taken years to resolve something. And I think you'll find you probably have done the same thing throughout your life. And so what is it really that is the challenge for us? Well, in a sense you could say the challenge for us is to realize that we are still as pure as when we descended. And this is, of course, a huge challenge. Now think about it, okay? We are exposed to this birth trauma. And the fallen beings did something to us. And I've said they hunt us. And there are these fallen beings in the lower identity realm that have a higher awareness than the fallen beings in embodiment. And these fallen beings in the identity realm, in a sense, they can tune into our live streams and they can sense what would be the worst thing that could happen to this person. What would be the absolutely worst situation that this person could imagine being in on a planet like Earth? And you can actually get some feel for this if you try to just sort of tune in to this question. What would be the worst thing you could imagine that could happen to you on Earth? And then this is very likely what the fallen beings did to you in one of your first embodiments when they exposed you to this birth trauma. They put you in exactly that situation that was the worst thing that could happen to you. And so, as a result of this, we had this experience of, we might call it total pain. And with total pain, I don't mean a physical pain that's unbearable, even though the physical pain can certainly be part of it. But it's also an emotional pain, a mental pain, and an identity level pain. In other words, we are exposed to a situation that affects all of our four lower bodies, makes us feel totally overwhelmed. We absolutely cannot stand this. Because there's a physical pain, there's an emotional feeling that this is the worst thing that could possibly happen, and now it has happened, and this is unbearable for me. There's a mental pain of how could this happen? Why did this happen? What did I do wrong? As I said in my last video, I didn't harm this fallen being. Why is he harming me? And then there's the identity level pain of who am I? Why couldn't I prevent this? Why couldn't I avoid this? Why am I here? Why did everyone come to Earth? I shouldn't have come here, and all of these things. So this puts us in this situation of total pain because we affected all our follower bodies and at a level that we can't stand. So it's total pain. So in order to survive psychologically and spiritually, we create this subconscious self. And the first effect or task, we might say, of this primal self is to suppress the pain. And as I said in my last video, you have to find some kind of explanation at the mental and identity level that allows us to suppress the pain. And that's individual for each one. But you see, the thing is, and of course, we create the primal self to suppress that pain. But then we have other experiences that expose us to pain, and so we create other selves. So we have not just the primal self, we often have a conglomerate of supporting selves that are sort of holding the primary self hidden from us. So what I'm saying is I'm talking about the primal self here, and it's true that if you could go directly to your primal self and resolve it, it would be a major leap forward. And it would, in a sense, be easier to dissolve the other selves as well. But in order to get to the primal self, most of us have to go through some of these other selves. So it's quite a process to uncover the primal self because we have these other selves first. But the point we can come to understand, and which really was helpful for me, is that the primal self, and even some of these other supporting selves, one of their tasks is to suppress the pain so that it's not unbearable, so that we can live with it. But if we start looking at one of these selves, it will project at us. Don't look, you'll be overwhelmed, it'll be too much, you'll be back to the original experience. And in a sense, you could say that when we had that initial birth trauma and we experienced this total pain, the decision we made, that the conscious you made, is, I never want to experience this again. I never want to experience this again. So the primary task of the primal self is to make sure we never experience this total pain again that we experienced back then. Why is it important to consider this? Well, because we need to recognize a very simple thing. And this is something that helped me tremendously to recognize this. That is, we can never experience the original pain again. What the self is projecting at us is an illusion. It's understandable that the self does it because the self, as I said, is like a computer program. Once it's programmed, it can only act on the programming. So we start looking at a self, and the self projects, you will experience the original pain again, and it'll be just as overwhelming to you as it was back then. But this is the lie, because we haven't stood still. For most of us, the birth trauma happened a very long time ago. I mean, it's not the same for all avatars. Some came later, but some avatars came 2 million years ago. So I, for example, have been in embodiment, not continuously, but over the last 2 million years, many, many times on Earth. And what does that mean? That means I have grown in those many lifetimes. So I received my birth trauma at the 48th level of consciousness. And that's why it was so overwhelming to me, because I was at the 48th level of consciousness and I looked through those filters. Now I have risen much higher than the 48th level of consciousness, which means that if I go back into the original birth trauma, go back into that self, I will not be overwhelmed. I will not have as terrible of an experience I had. I will not have the total pain. I can actually bear to look at it today. But the trouble is, you see, once a self has been created, it's there. in our subconscious minds. And it affects us. It colors everything we see. It's like a filter we are looking through. And we will never overcome the self until we look at it, until we go into the self, both in the emotional, the mental, and identity levels of the mind. The only way to overcome a self is to go into it and see that, oh, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. Basically, it's like going into a hurricane. You know, tremendous wind swirling around. When you get to the center of it, there's the eye of the hurricane, and it's calm. And it's the same with a self. You go into it through the pain, first the emotional pain, then the mental, then the identity, and then you enter that core of the self and you see, but there's nothing here. It was just a decision I made. And I made that decision based on the level of awareness, based on all these perception filters I had at the time. But it's an illusion. And now that I have a much higher level of awareness, I can see that it's an illusion. And I can dismiss it. I can just simply say, I don't want you anymore in my life. I don't want you affecting my life on earth. And that's how we overcome any self. We have to come to that point where we reconnect that we're the conscious you, we are looking at the self, and we see that it's just a self. It's just a piece of clothing I took on. And I can take it off as easily as I took it on. But this has to be a conscious process in order to be free of it. It's not going to happen automatically. And that's why you have the entire industry of spirituality out there that promises you there's some kind of miracle cure. You just keep meditating, you just keep chanting, you just keep doing this and doing that, and one day you will overcome your ego, your psychology. But you won't, because it was created by you, because the conscious you made a decision. It wasn't a very good decision, it wasn't a very aware decision, it was most likely made on a much lower level of consciousness than you have today. But that's also why you can come to see it, and when you see the original decision from the level of consciousness you have today, you can easily dismiss it. It's not difficult to dismiss it. The trick is to come to see it. Okay, so here is the kind of the essential realization that I wanted to really talk about in this video. And it's a little bit tricky to understand it. Again, it took me a while to understand this. And it ties in with the fallen beings again. Because what the fallen beings want to do is they want to prevent us from fulfilling our mission on earth, our reason for coming to earth. And they attempt to do it by destroying us psychologically, but also by deceiving us. So you have this very common situation, you know, we are exposed to this tremendous atrocity that creates this birth trauma, we create this primal self. And for some avatars, they're basically, I guess there's three, but there's two main reactions we can go into as avatars. And one of them is that we can go into saying, I don't want to ever experience this again, so I'm not going to fight the fallen beings, I'm not going to interact with the fallen beings, I'm going to try and get away from them as much as I can. Just stay away from them. And the other is we can go into, aha, now I see what's the problem on earth, it's the fallen beings, so I need to fight them. So we either submit or we fight. Fight or flight, basically. And there's a third reaction, which is that we try to just withdraw from life in general on earth, you know, not engage in anything. But either way, you know, whether we submit or withdraw, we are not a threat to the fallen beings anymore. And often they will actually leave avatars alone. I have met many spiritual people on the spiritual path who are avatars. And you talk to them about dark forces or fallen beings, and they immediately shut off. They just completely shut you out. Because their philosophy is, it's all good. If I just ignore anything bad, it can't touch me. And in a sense, they're right, because if you are not a threat to the fallen beings, they won't attack you. They'll leave you alone. The problem is, then you are not really fulfilling your highest potential for being on Earth either. You may feel you are very spiritual, but you're not really helping the planet grow. Now, the other reaction, of course, if you fight the fallen beings, you're not fulfilling your highest potential either, because now you're going in, you're engaging in all this battle, and you are basically using your energy, misqualifying energy, in order to fight the fallen beings. And this is actually very much described in the book that I talked about, My Lives with Lucifer, Satan, Hitler, and Jesus. It describes how an avatar goes into fighting the fallen beings. So, so what the fallen beings have done, they have tried to project out certain things that, well, it has two effects. It helps them control the people on Earth, the original inhabitants, but it also helps pacify avatars. And I've said it before in some of my How the World Works videos, but what the fallen beings did when they came to Earth, they projected there is a standard. And it's an absolute standard based on some absolute authority. And it's an all or nothing, it's a black and white standard. You either live up to it or you don't. So there's good and there's evil. And either you are fully good or you're evil. And in order to be fully good, you basically have to be perfect. And since nobody can be perfect, well, nobody is fully good, except maybe the fallen beings who set themselves up as some kind of authority. So this idea that there's a standard on Earth against which everything should be measured, that is the primary tool of the fallen beings. Now, it's not really a tool that they use consciously, deliberately, because they are trapped in it themselves. They are evaluating everything based on this because of their bigger agenda, which I won't go into here. So, as an avatar, when we come to Earth, what happens is when we receive this birth trauma, we lose a certain awareness that we had, even at the 48th level, where we had this sense of connection. We lose a certain awareness, and the awareness was that nothing on Earth really matters. That what happens on Earth is not the ultimate, because there's a higher evaluation than Earth. In other words, when you have a sense that you're not really a human being, you are connected to a higher self in the spiritual realm, and there's a spiritual way to look at life. It's like you have a frame of reference. You can't really be pulled into fully identifying with something on Earth, because there's always some other evaluation beyond Earth. But when we receive the birth trauma and create the primal self, in order for the primal self to suppress the trauma and make sure we never have that experience again, then the primal self has to, as I said, had to create some kind of explanation that makes it seem livable. And that explanation is not a spiritual explanation, it's an earthly explanation. In other words, the primal self, it can't really think. It can't really think creatively. It certainly can't think spiritually. It has no intuition. But the primal self, so the primal self thinks based on whatever ideas are here. And those ideas, of course, were defined by the fallen beings. So the primal self adopts this standard. And the primal self basically says, if you live up to this standard, then the bad thing that happened to you will never happen again. So now, instead of having this frame of reference, there was a spiritual reason why I'm here, there's a spiritual purpose why I'm here, we are now put into this reactionary mode, where we are thinking that if we react to this standard, if we follow this standard, then we will never again experience that total pain. We'll be safe, we'll be okay. It's like I said with these spiritual people, oh, if I just sit around and meditate and think that everything is good and never challenge anybody, then they'll leave me alone, which they will. So this means that from the moment we create the primal self, we are now in a reactionary mode. We are reacting to conditions on Earth. We are reacting to the fallen beings. The primary self is a reactionary self. All selves are reactionary selves. They can only react to the conditions that are here. And so this is how we go into, we can say, total immersion, fully identify ourselves as human beings living on Earth. And, when I first heard about this, it gave me a lot of trouble. I mean, I really had a lot of difficulty with this, because I had this sense that as an avatar, I should be better than the people on Earth. And I should certainly be better than the fallen beings. So I shouldn't have gone into this. I shouldn't have fully identified myself as a human being. I shouldn't have fully gone into immersion. I should have maintained some sense that I'm not from Earth. That is how I felt. And it took me a while to realize this was the self. And it was actually a self based on this standard that, I should have been perfect. I see everybody else wasn't, but I should have. And I met other avatars who have the same kind of thing. We feel there's certain things that shouldn't have happened on Earth. There are certain things that we shouldn't have done on Earth. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. The fallen beings have a standard that says, this should happen, this should not happen. This is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is evil. So you see, we create our own standard based on this as avatars. And we say, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have made this mistake. I should have been above this. So I shouldn't have fully identified myself. But what did I say earlier? What was the Omega reason for coming to Earth? It was that we came here, we did identify ourselves as human beings, and then we woke up and demonstrated how to awaken. That no matter how deep you've gone into separation, you can awaken, climb back up the spiritual path, and ascend. So, if we hadn't identified ourselves, how would we demonstrate the path? And that's part of our reason for being here. Okay, I was building up to come to this point. When we adopted the idea that there's a standard and that everything that happens to on Earth has to be measured against this standard, we go into a very specific mindset. Because now we think that we are here on Earth to achieve specific physical results that can be measured by this standard that was created on Earth. This can take some contemplation, but let me give you an example. For me, one of the very disturbing things on Earth is war. And I realized that I had been exposed to war a long time ago. I had seen how millions of people were killed. The fallen beings blamed me for this, that I was the one who caused this war, and I could have just avoided it by obeying the fallen beings and blah, blah, blah. Whatever the situation was, doesn't matter specifically. But I have come to believe that war was one of the worst things that can happen on Earth. Which basically meant I had created a self that said, you can't be at peace on Earth as long as there's war. You can't enjoy life on Earth as long as there's war. And you can't leave Earth as long as there's war. So this meant that my entire relationship to Earth was colored by this self. Because obviously there's war on Earth, and obviously there's likely to be war for some time yet. So it colored the way I looked at Earth, but it also colored me in the sense of thinking, I can't leave until this condition has been changed. And for you, it's probably going to be other things. I mean, some other avatars, of course, also are concerned about war, but avatars are concerned about many different kind of issues because we are here to provide sort of a counterbalance to the fallen beings on those particular issues and also bring forth some ideas that can help the planet transcend those issues. But what I'm saying is, we create this self that says, my purpose for coming to Earth was to resolve this or remove this physical condition. And now all of a sudden, my success on earth is measured by have I removed or have we removed this condition? And obviously you could say that puts you in a negative right away, especially if it's something like war, but whatever it is, as long as that physical condition persists, you're a failure because you haven't achieved it. But the problem here is, why hasn't war been removed on earth? Because free will, the law of free will mandates that Earth is a planet where people physically outpicture their state of consciousness. Everything that happens physically on Earth is a result of people's state of consciousness, individually and collectively. So there's war on Earth because not enough people have raised their consciousness to the point where war becomes impossible. You can see that in some democratic nations they have done it, but many others haven't. So, what can I do as one person to change people's consciousness? I can't force them to change. That is violating their free will. It's also rather impossible on a planet like Earth. So this means what? It means I am condemned by this self to feel like a failure. Because actually it was two selves, one predicting I should be instrumental in removing war, and another predicting you're a failure until that has been achieved. And so, what does it take then to overcome a self like that? What does it take? It takes, as I've said, that the conscious you returns to this state of pure awareness where it sees, okay, I have this self in my subconscious mind. I have created this self. I take responsibility for having created it. But the good thing about taking responsibility for having created it is that makes me realize what I have created, I can also uncreate. It's myself. I created it, and I can uncreate it. How do I uncreate it? By undoing the decision I made when I created it. By coming to see, oh, I made that decision based on an illusion that I had at a lower level of consciousness. Now I have risen above that level of consciousness, and therefore I can see the illusion. I couldn't see it at that level, but I can see it now, and I don't want to live my life based on an illusion. Therefore, I can let the self die. But what does it take for us to really come to that point? It takes that we come to the point where we say, or we see, we realize, we intuitively experience the outer outcome that the self projects doesn't matter. I am not here to remove war from Earth. Because what I'm here for is not to create a specific physical condition. So what you need to realize about a self is that the self is always projecting there's a problem you have to solve. But that problem is always out there, and in order to solve the problem, other people have to change. And this is what puts us in a bind as avatars. Now you will see fallen beings, they're not in this bind, because they are always projecting out that the problem is out there. They never see that there's a problem in their own self, in their own consciousness. So always projecting, problem is out there, so people have to change. How do we get them to change? We force them to change. We force them to obey us and follow us. We deceive them. We force them out, we deceive them. But as avatars, we don't want to force anybody, we don't want to deceive anybody. So when we think there's an outer problem we have to solve that involves the free will choices of other people, we're stuck. We're paralyzed. We're immobilized. We're in this coma, a no man's land, a catch-22, an enigma. We can't get out of it. But we can, because we can realize that it's only a self that's projecting that this problem has to be solved before we can feel at peace or before we can leave Earth. So in other words, the self is projecting, you have to solve this problem. And in order to overcome the self, the conscious you has to step back, look at the self from the outside and say, no, I don't have to solve this problem. I can be at peace on Earth even if there's war on Earth. And I can choose to ascend from Earth after this lifetime, even though there's still war on Earth. This was a really hard one for me. This was a really hard one for me. And the reason why it was hard is it's sort of a double whammy, you know, one self projecting this and one self projecting that. So you have the reaction that there's something, you know, your birth trauma. It should not have happened. This should not have happened to me. And then what you come to after the birth trauma is you, as I said, you have this total pain that goes in the emotional, mental, and identity level. And at the identity level, you start doubting whether you should have come to Earth. Maybe it was a stupid decision. Maybe I shouldn't have chosen to come to Earth. Maybe it's impossible to do anything on Earth. You have all of these doubts. And you, of course, create a self to suppress those doubts. But then that self is projecting, or at least it was for me, projecting that I can suppress my doubts about coming to Earth if I achieve something worthwhile. Right? So I have the doubts I shouldn't come to Earth, but I have a self that can suppress those doubts as long as I have the hope that one day I'll achieve something worthwhile, something that made a difference, something important. And so that means I now look back at my life in this lifetime, and no doubt also in many past lifetimes. I saw that all of my life, from when I was the earliest child, I had a sense, I'm here for a purpose, I'm here to do something positive. It's very important that I'm doing something positive. When I found the spiritual path at the age of 18, I realized it's not really about going out in society and having a career and doing something there. It's more about something spiritual. But I still thought I had to spiritually make a difference. So in my first spiritual movement, the meditation movement, it was if we just meditated, it would have an impact on the planet. We would overcome crime, we would overcome war, we would pull the planet up by meditating. And then in my second spiritual movement, it was about decrees, invoking spiritual light from the Ascended Masters. And if we just invoked enough spiritual light, we would also overcome all of these problems. And I'm not saying there isn't something to that, but what I realized was that even though I had been doing this for 40 years, doing all these spiritual exercises and spiritual work to invoke light, it hadn't done anything to resolve my own psychology, because I had these subconscious selves and they haven't been touched by it. In fact, the subconscious self that projected, you have to do something that's worthwhile on Earth, it was just becoming stronger. The more spiritual work I did, the stronger this self was becoming, because now I could feel, but I've given all of these decrees, I've done all this meditation, I've studied all these teachings, now I've published all these teachings and written all these books, and so I must have done something. It must have made a difference. And so after over 40 years on the path, I got these teachings about the avatars and the primal self. And I really started working on it, starting asking the Ascended Masters to help me see this. And I started coming to see that I had this self that felt like there's something I have to do on Earth. I have to do something important. I have to do something worthwhile. It has to have been worth it that I came to Earth. It couldn't just be all a failure that it didn't make any difference. It must have made a difference. But this was very much tied to something outer. And again, as I said, that depends on the free will choices of other people, which I can't control and which I don't want to control. So I was very much stuck. And so I was working with this, asking the Masters, as I always do, to help me see this. And I will never, ever forget this. I know I've talked about the situation in some other videos, but I put the issue on the shelf for a while. But then one morning I wake up very early in the morning. I'm kind of halfway awake, not quite awake. And all of a sudden this comes to me. There's nothing I have to do on Earth. And the words came from deep inside, but it wasn't just the words. It was like this complete release. Complete release. And it was like something broke, something gave way, a dam burst. And all of a sudden, this self was just dissolved. It was just gone. And I felt this enormous freedom. I mean, I remember feeling that even my physical body was so soft that I couldn't have gotten out of bed. I simply could not have moved. And my emotions were just completely calm. I basically had no thoughts. And my sense of identity, it was like I wasn't identified with anything on earth. And it doesn't always feel that dramatic when you dissolve a self. But in some cases, it can feel like this. It was like this, I talked about the total pain, but this was the total release. I mean, the total release of this pain. Because I realized there's nothing I have to do. I don't have to do anything outer. Whether it makes a difference in the outer that I have been on earth or not, it doesn't matter. Because it has still made a difference to me and my growth. So here comes the tricky part. Am I thereby saying that as avatars we're not here to have a positive impact on society? That we should never try to do anything that can be measured as making a physical difference? No, that's not what I'm saying. There are many avatars. We all have an individual divine plan that we made along with the Ascended Masters before we came into this embodiment. Avatars that are embodiment at this time, there are two approaches we have. One is we see that we can ascend after this lifetime. We have decided we want to ascend after this lifetime. So our whole divine plan is geared towards the ascension. The other is that we see that we are on the cusp of Saint Germain's golden age, and we want to be an embodiment and remain an embodiment to help bring about that golden age. So again, our whole divine plan is geared towards that. And of course, those of us who want to ascend, we also have, we want to do something in our final embodiment to help Saint Germain's golden age. But what I'm trying to explain here is this. When we create this primal self and the other selves that follow from it, we go into a mode of trying to compensate. You see what I've just explained about my own situation? You might have a similar reaction, you might have a slightly different reaction. But what I explained was, I created this self that said it has to have made a difference that I came to Earth. It couldn't just have been pointless. And this is a compensatory self. So I was driven to try to do something that made a physical difference as a way of compensating for this self that doubted that it was worthwhile to come to Earth. And what this did, and I can see this my entire lifetime, it put me in a state of tension, stress, tension. I was always obsessive compulsive about doing something, which often sabotaged myself. I became too eager, too anxious, wanted to make a difference now. So I pushed people too hard and often pushed them away from me. And you might be able to see the same thing in your life because many avatars have this. So what I'm saying is, you may have it in your divine plan to go into a specific area of society and make a difference there. But you can't fulfill that if you are coming from this compensating, and pushing, and obsessive compulsiveness that it has to happen. So that's how we can often fail as avatars to achieve our highest potential, because we are still trapped in this compensation mode. But if we can overcome this separate self, going all the way back to the primal self, overcome this, we're not compensating anymore. And that is when we can really make the difference that we wanted to make. Because now it's not from the outer self we are trying to achieve this goal. Now we realize what Jesus said. I can on my own self do nothing. The Father within, which is the I Am Presence and the Ascended Masters, is the true doer. And so now we can focus on, instead of this obsessive compulsive having to do this, we can focus on just being the open door. I've gone into a mode today where I don't really make decisions with the outer mind anymore. I just wait for it to come from within, from the Ascended Masters, from my I Am Presence, and it's just sort of oh yeah, I'll do this. It's not that I sit there and plan and think and obsess about it. Oh, could I fail? What would happen? How would other people react? All of this stuff. I'll do this. I'll do this. No, I didn't think for days about this video. I mulled over the topic and then, okay, time to do the video. And so this is what many people have described, how they go into this when they go beyond a certain level of the path where they are not so focused on the self. So, but you can speed up that process by becoming aware of this idea of the subconscious selves and coming to see them as illusions. So, just to round this off, many of us are here to achieve specific things on Earth. Now, the thing is, for me, for example, I'll just use my own example. I have written a lot of books, I have written a lot of websites, where there's an enormous amount of material on there. And for many, many years when I started doing this, for the first maybe 18 years maybe 17, 18 years I started doing this, I was focused on it should help people. And many people should find it and it should hopefully help them. But now, I'm not focused on that anymore. I'm just focused on it's enough for me to know that this material is in the physical realm where people can find it. And whether people find it and what they do with it, I'm not attached to that. It doesn't matter to me anymore. It's of course it's a positive thing for me if people are helped by it, but I'm not obsessive compulsive about it as I used to be. I'm not attached to a specific outcome. I'm just doing the work because this is my work. This is my divine plan. This is the way I express myself. So what I'm saying is we can all come to this point where we are not attached to the outer form it takes, to the outer results, to other people's reactions. We are just expressing ourselves, and the fact that the expression has been given in the physical, that is the reward in itself. That's the fulfillment of our divine plan and our potential. It's not what other people do with it. And this means what? It means now we become an open door for our higher selves and the ascended masters. And they can do two things. They can release ideas and they can release spiritual light. I mean, higher energies of a higher frequency and vibration. And why is this important? Well, you think about a dark room. It's completely dark. Nobody can see anything. You can go around feeling, and you have the old story in India of the three blind men who come across an elephant. And one gets a hold of the tusk and thinks it's a snake, another gets a hold of the leg and thinks that it's a tree, and the third gets a hold of the tail and thinks it's a donkey, because they can't see what it is. So that's the story of humankind. Some people have some genuine ideas, but they don't see the big picture because they're all focused on one little thing. So how do you overcome this? How do you get to a point where people can see what's actually in the room? Well, you increase the light. This is a principle that I actually learned in my first spiritual movement. You can't remove darkness from a room. You can't put it in garbage bags and throw the bags out the window and you've removed the darkness, because darkness has no substance. You can bring the light. And when you increase the light in the room, people will begin to see. And I've talked about how people are addicted to suffering and they want to suffer and they reject whatever we say to them. And that's true as long as we are talking. But what has been happening for a long time on Earth now is that very, very gradually the level of light, the intensity of light has been increased. And that means people can see things that they couldn't see 100 or 500 years ago. And you can see in the world how when things become obvious, there are shifts in people's behavior and consciousness. I've talked about democracy before. The light increased to a point where people could see that they wanted a better kind of government than a dictatorial government. And they could start seeing the democratic principles about rights and equality and this and that. And so it just became obvious to people. They didn't have to be talked into it. They just saw it. And this is the major impact that we as avatars actually have on planet Earth. We are, by just being in physical embodiment, we are increasing the amount of light. And we're actually doing this even if we are fully identified as human beings and trapped in this primal self. But the more we overcome the separate selves, the more we rise towards the 144th level of consciousness, the more of an open door we become, which means more light can stream through us. And it happens all the time. Whether you are eating or going to the bathroom or sleeping, there is light streaming through your identity, mental, emotional, and physical body. Through your chakras, there's constantly light streaming. And it is not having a specific measurable effect that you can trace. You can't just say, oh, this amount of light streamed through me, and now it's going to have this effect on war. No, it just raises the general level of light so that people everywhere start seeing things they hadn't seen before. And that's how the planet actually progresses. So again, you can say, was it crazy of us to come to Earth? No, because by being in physical embodiment, we have been the open door for the light. So what I'm trying to say is that, in a sense, you could say the major shift that happened for me and many other people I know as a result of this avatar teaching is that we suddenly realized that we can have one experience at the conscious level, but it will be colored by all these selves. And therefore we can at the conscious level feel like, oh, I haven't really made much spiritual progress, I haven't really made a difference, have I really fulfilled my divine plan, have I really done anything important? But from a higher perspective of the I Am Presence, the answer is yes, we have made a difference. We have done something important. But it's not necessarily that we can point to specific physical results. The biggest result, the biggest impact we've had on this planet is the raising of the collective consciousness. And I've said before that there are billions of natural planets where the inhabitants of those natural planets are raising their consciousness. And they are creating a magnetic force that is pulling up on the entire universe, including Earth. And what we do as avatars is the more we overcome these separate selves, the more we actually tune into that upward force of the river of life, and the more we come an open door for it. And this is what means we will win. We are winning. The earth is being pulled up. The fallen beings and humankind cannot resist the upward pull of the entire universe. And so as we overcome these selves, we become more conscious of this. We tie into this. We feel this upward pull. We feel we are part of it. And therefore we overcome this sense of, oh, I shouldn't have come to Earth. I'm a failure. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. We can let the whole thing go. We can let these selves go. And we can actually be at peace with being on Earth. And we can say, well, I'm just observing. I'm just experiencing myself in this environment, whatever the environment is. I'm just experiencing it. And, you know, when I look back at before I had that release, where I still think that I was obsessive compulsive about having to do something on Earth, and then now, it's just a world of difference. And, you know, I'm not telling you this to show that I'm such an evolved spiritual being, because the principle of the Ascended Masters is what one has done, all can do. So I'm not telling you this to make myself look special, but to realize you can do the same thing. You can also come to that point where you have resolved all of these selves that are blocking you right now. And you can be at peace with being on Earth. You can allow yourself to be yourself, because in a sense we could say, what did we really come to Earth for? Just to be ourselves. The question is, who is ourselves? How do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as all these outer selves, this outer personality, or as the I Am Presence? And that's, of course, I'll talk more about that in coming videos, how we get into the nitty-gritty of dealing with these selves. So I hope you'll join me for those also.